Welcome, everybody. Hello. Hello, yes. You're going to hear more about the video we just saw in a moment when Raven from Kinfolk Tech comes up to say a little bit about the night. But first, I want to welcome you to the Center for Brooklyn History on behalf of everyone here at the center and at the Brooklyn Public Library, which we are part of, and the Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents. My name is Marcia Eli. Here at CBH, we have weekly free public programs like this one, and I hope you'll keep an eye out on what's coming up. This fall, for instance, we're excited to welcome Jelani Cobb, Tourmaline, Annette Gordon-Reed, and we're putting final details on a Liberacion Film Festival co-presented with the Afro-Latin Project. But today, August 5th, is National Oyster Day. Yes, I will tell you, Googling around, I discovered that it is also National Night Out Day, National Work Like a Dog Day, and National Underwear Day. These are truths. But tonight we're focusing on National Oyster Day as a perfect opportunity to bring together experts, art, and augmented reality and connect them to Black foodways, entrepreneurship, and Brooklyn. The linchpin for all of this is Kinfolk Tech and artist Jeremiah Oho, who, as you'll learn, conducted research here at CBH for many months for a project that you'll hear more about shortly. This is just one of the many examples of the ways that scholars, historians, as well as artists, and everyone uses our archives, so that's something for you to consider too. I'm super sorry to share that our chief historian, Dominique Jean-Louis, who was part of this panel, is now crawling into bed with COVID. So she sends her regrets. She's really disappointed that she can't be here tonight. But we're going to have a wonderful conversation and program, and towards the end, we're going to turn to questions from you. So now, to connect the dots and introduce our panel, it's my pleasure to welcome Raven Ruffin-Feliz, Kinfolk Tech's Director of Strategic Partnerships.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Well, first I want to say thank you for being here on a Tuesday evening of all the places you could be. So really grateful to have a full house. As it was said, my name is Raven. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships at Kinfolk Tech. The video you saw is a little bit about the ways that we work and activate in community. So we are a nonprofit organization working in collaboration with artists, with community members, with cultural organizations, to really tell our stories, preserve our stories in ways using digital technology. And so what you saw were folks who were at our Brooklyn Bridge Park exhibition using their phones or an iPad to activate augmented reality monuments. And so the Kinfolk app, which is a free app available for download, allows you to see the works that we've created in collaboration with these folks to really preserve our stories. So we're trying to create an archive that can fit in your pocket. And so really excited that tonight is inspired by the work of Jeremiah Ojo, who has been a fellow with us since January, and it's been a beautiful opportunity to go deep into the research of Brooklyn and into the histories and stories that underline the geographies here, especially along this Brooklyn Bridge Park and downtown. And so Jeremiah has done the research around the Oyster House, which he'll talk more about, which is the experience that you saw. And after tonight's talk, we have 2 docents and iPads for you to experience Jeremiah's augmented reality project that he created that allows you to see a version of this Oyster House if it were to exist. And so Again, we're really excited to be in collaboration with the Center for Brooklyn History, and thank you to Marcia and the team here for hosting us. I'm really excited for this conversation that has been inspired by the research that he's been doing deep in the archives and meeting the community to really unearth what it means for Black folks who were doing this work of oystering and making a way out of no way up from slavery. So I will do the honor of welcoming up our panelists. Hopefully you had a chance to read their bio, but they'll also be introing themselves a little bit. So I'll save you more words from me. So I'm excited to welcome up Jeremiah Ojo to start. Ben Moody Harney. The real Mother Shucker. And the food griot, Tanya Hopkins. So as it was said, they'll be in conversation for a bit this evening. We'll turn it over to the audience for some questions, and then we'll have a short reception. We have some wine and patties from Natural Blend, if you know it. So we're celebrating Caribbean culture tonight and history. Go ahead, take it away.
All right, hello, good evening, everyone. Hello again and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am Jeremiah Olainka Ojo. Make sure I say that right, Ojo. I will be your moderator this evening. I'm beyond just being the moderator, I'm also a preservationist, a cultural entrepreneur, and artist and educator. My work is rooted at the intersection of community engagement and historic preservation focused on Black and African diasporic communities. And I've been so honored and excited to be the inaugural community fellow with Kinfolk Tech. So to ground our conversation, I'm gonna use some reference images and some slides for you guys to get a better sense of how I started the research for this project. And please excuse my educator element. I have notes as if I'm a professor. So feel free to take notes. All right, so what's really interesting about this project is it is fully research-based. As Raven and Marcia made reference, it started here at the Center for Brooklyn History. I had the great pleasure back in February to schedule time to explore the archives, knowing that my fellowship would culminate with the Dreaming with the Archives exhibition in partnership with the Brooklyn Bridge Park. I wanted to explore the history of the waterfront in Brooklyn, knowing that it has changed so many times just in the time that I've been here, not to mention over, the last century or so. So I wanted to give you all some insights.
Culture and tradition carried on through storytelling, through nonfiction storytelling, passing that information on. And so, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago when I started seriously becoming a, I'm not trying to age myself, y'all. A while ago when I became a food historian, that word seemed to be the most appropriate because, And so I'm building on it now with the food griot drinks. As the great-granddaughter of a speakeasy owner, that's a whole nother conversation. We'll talk about pairing oysters, not tonight. So yes, my work focuses on uniquely American history, food and drink history from an African-American perspective. I don't claim to speak for everyone. It's from mine and my family and my experience, but also uniquely American as a scholar and as a public educator who has to dig into the archives and has to be a detective because we have to go beyond the archives and draw from so many different mediums, whether it's literature and film and poetry and anything, because this type of history is intentionally so sparsely documented. So we have to be very creative with that. I also focus on the North. I have a working title called Northern Negro Cookery to look at how things like the development of fine dining
And this is where it gets beyond just the African American perspective to be a fully American, uniquely American story that we all, regardless of heritage, culture, background, origin, share. Because the foundation of American Foodways, every single aspect of it, after the gratitude we have to give to the indigenous Americans whose cultivation genius we all build upon, for the development of crops like corn and squash and tomatoes in Mesoamerica, potatoes in South America. Those crops are like 60% of today's world food supply. With the enslaved Africans coming here into the New World, we build on that with additional crops. The rice, the American rice industry is African from Black Africa and present-day Angola, the Congo. And I'm mentioning that because it connects to the many facets of American foodways, from agriculture, from growing to problem solving, to cultivating, harvesting, preparing. And through my work, I was able to see how the Chesapeake Bay becomes a central area of ground zero for American fine dining. To fast forward, there's a connection, and we'll talk more about that in the conversation, between that region of where the plantation cookery, Maryland, Virginia, and what's happening there, and how that connects to this region and to the oyster houses and to the early restaurateurs like Johnny Joe and also Thomas Downing. So as a co-founder of the James Hemings Society, James Hemings being our nation's first classically trained chef of any hue, he was owned by Thomas Jefferson, and he has a very key influence on fine dining dishes. When we talk about these oyster houses, it's about location and place and experience. It also connects to the caterers, which is another line of work. I could go on and on. The reason why I think they chose these pictures, the one with the headphones, I've got some podcast episodes on my website, the few that I was able to afford to produce, that focus on Philadelphia culinarians, caterers, confectioners, who establish a lot of other industries. We'll connect the dots to. I think that's all I want you guys to know for now.
Thank you, Tim.
Yes, that's all for now. Stay tuned.
We'll unpack much more with a lot of questions in our dialogue. But now, throwing it to Moody, knowing that you're carrying this legacy forward in a very tangible way with the Real Mother Shuckers, can you talk about your business, the mission, and so forth?
Certainly, yes. So my name's Moody. I have a restaurant in Manhattan called Mother Shuckers, as he just now said. We're located at Pier 57, 16th Street, 11th Avenue in Manhattan. So if you guys are ever looking for some oysters, come and pull up on me at my place. We started out actually with an oyster cart. So that's actually an homage to old school New York. And yeah, you can see a cart right there. And we're doing some oyster education here with some students. And that's our kiosk over there at Pier 57. And yeah, so I started out, you can go to the next slide. All right, yeah, so I started out in Louisiana with the oysters. And I actually just tried oysters for the first time in Louisiana. I'm actually a third generation New Yorker. Well, I might be more than, but yeah, definitely third generation, I know for a fact. And I actually went to private school around the corner from here when I was a kid. And I had never had an oyster until I was an adult, and I moved to Florida in my early 20s. And it was a grilled oyster in Louisiana, actually, not Florida. In Louisiana, I had a grilled oyster, and it was delicious. I was like, oh, wow, oysters. I'd never had that before, and I wasn't expecting it to be so good, but I knew that I liked seafood. And the grilled oyster was very, very, it was delicious, you know. But the concept of a raw oyster still kind of messed me up, you know. And so being from New York and not having exposure to oysters was also a strange thing to me, because I had been exposed to so much previous to, you know, moving to Louisiana and Florida. I thought I knew everything. and getting my first raw oyster in Florida, actually, not Louisiana, and trying out a Gulf Coast oyster and being like, this is what rich people do. This is terrible, and coming back to New York and then working at a place that had about 30 different kinds of oysters. This place called Maison Premiere out in Williamsburg. And, they had so many different kinds of oysters, I actually could smell the different kinds of regions on my gloves and in the oysters themselves. So I tried it again, and then I actually got exposed to this book called The Big Oyster. I don't know if I have any more slides up here. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. So, yeah, we started out with a refurbished oyster cart, right? And my cart was actually an idea that I had gotten based off of finding out when I got an oyster for the first time, and I liked an oyster for the first time, that was a raw oyster rather, that New York City was the oyster capital of the world previously, and that there was this company, there was this book actually written by this guy, Mark Kurlansky, The Big Oyster. And it was talking about how New York City was not only the oyster capital of the world, but it was also the place where this guy, Thomas Downing, turned oysters into fine dining. And this is the first time that I actually sat down as a native New Yorker, third generation black person, somebody whose family's been, County Cullen scholarships to NYU and all kind of cool American history stuff. I had never really thought about the concept of free, wealthy African Americans during America's foundational time period. And the fact that not only that there would have been some, but there would have been a lot of them, and that all that information would have been very much so prevalent around where I grew up at. My hometown in New York City being a place where slavery wasn't the main source of people's income. Plantations wasn't necessarily how people were able to create their fortunes. It was more through trade in, reestablishing trade of things that had already been procured. And the foundation of New York City as what would become the World Trade Center and places like these oyster bars, where at the time period when if you were a free black person, you had a piece of paper that was what said that you were free. And other than that, it was really just a word of mouth of people around you and the people protecting you, being around you to keep you from getting sold back into slavery potentially. And so there's a lot of people specifically in New York, but in general, that were in maritime trade in terms of running these sloop ships up and down the Hudson River, carrying people and transporting all this rice and grain and people and things all the way from New York City all the way up to Albany. And oystermen from Staten Island, Brooklyn, Manhattan, who were African American, who created entire fortunes, actually, fortunes off of oystering with these little dinghies and these little tongs, and they'd basically just go and pick up oysters off the ground with tongs and put them, a boatload of oysters onto these little dinghies and bring them in and be able to sell them from the street just like that. And then graduated into, like what Tanya was saying, what became fine dining in America. Because previous to, these black people who were basically, in terms of society, one step above, a servant, a slave, and not really being able to carve out too much of a position in the world without that onus over them. But creating fine dining to where, Thomas Downing's was one of the first places where people were able to actually come and eat and dine and to do the bartering and trade, which would be the location, literally, of what is now the World Trade Center. Do bartering and trade for the first time in a location that wasn't a dive bar or a cellar, meaning you had to dive into the cellar of these jinky bars where people were, young ladies were.
You can say it. We're all adults here.
They were finding out the information that would need to be had in order to do the business transactions, and people were spending the night. So, now Thomas Downey made a fancy place, and this is all a super religious time inside of American history when, this is like what our country was founded on was religion. And so, making a fine dining place, making a, respectable place with these kind of guidelines, and as an entrepreneur, like, there's a saying Jay-Z said is sell water to sell sand to a beach, sell water to a well. Water to a well. So it's like, these guys were basically taking oysters at a time period when it was like so abundant. It was just, you could pick them up off the beach, and they were selling them and turning it into a fine dining food. And then literally within the end of the American Civil War, which is our industrial revolution's beginning. That's what happened when we lost slavery. We got factories, we got the war machine, we got steamboats, we got dredging. We got the ability to come with a boat and pull up the entire ocean floor at one time, whereas these guys were literally just using tongs before and able to carve out. You can't compete with a steamboat, We got factories.
So let's open up the conversation and talk about that, because I think that's a really important point. Both of you made reference to this long and rich history of oystermen and oysters being so readily accessible in New York, in Brooklyn. Sitting here on National Oyster Day, like it has its own national designation, why don't you think New Yorkers, Brooklynites, your everyday person knows about where to eat or connect with the history of oysters in New York?
I mean, what I'm going to start saying, you need to finish complete, is, for one thing, the population a few centuries ago or depleted the entire New York supply. This crazy abundance that we had, that we were providing the world with the best oysters, and they are no more. And I know that there is a whole comeback process, and they are out there, but you can't eat them yet because they're playing another role of filtering and cleaning up. It's very complicated, but I mentioned the Native Americans before, because this also starts with them, right? The oysters, and so I can only imagine from their perspective, like, what, like, look what y'all did.
Yeah.
But anyway, for one thing, they're not here anymore, and and then the history, right? History that often, part of the work I do, we all do, in terms of writing back into the narrative. People who have been intentionally or accidentally erased from the story, that type of history often isn't preserved. When there are prominent Black people at the center of the story or at the lead of the story, facilitating, changing, creating industry and a whole new, And there are several. This oyster one is a major one, but there are several others that when you do the detective work, you're like, oh, they created that food. Mostly, I come up, everything's food, culinary. That food industry, that drink industry. Oh, wow. So that's my answer. But they're not here, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it to me, it's like multiple different things. One thing is what Tanya started out saying at the very beginning of what you were talking about, where it's like you're digging through all of these archives of something that somebody had a little piece of, and you're like, I know that this exists somewhere because it's quoted here, and I don't think they just made it up, so I can go and dig. But you literally have to dig through everything, including block building records, in order to find out some of this basic information is true. And to a certain extent, you just have to accept it. You have to just think of it as more about logical, conceptually, would this logically be a possibility or not, in order for you to accept it. And that's really how I'm coming to a lot of hypotheses that I've come to, is based off of logic. And it's like, New York City, we can't trace back 20,000 years of American history inside of New York City, but we can trace back 20,000 years of oyster shells here that were here on the coastlines that people used to collect and intentionally keep those oyster shells at location because it was an eating grounds. It was a location where it was an estuary. It's very similar to majority of the most important places inside of human civilizations, Tokyo, even Lagos, everywhere inside the world there's a fresh to salt water mixing is a crucial place for human populations to be for thousands and thousands of years of our existence on this planet. So oysters, being shellfish, being our first currency, shells were very, very important in terms of a representation of where you come from on the planet. And it's like based off of your ecosystem, you have this shell, and this can be a representation. This could be our first currency, international currency, is cowrie shells and wampum and the skellies. I can't pronounce this dang shell, but whatever. And it's like, the history of people being inside of places like New York City and having oysters as a staple and keeping the shells in these mountains previous was worldwide, and then we took the shells and we used them for landfill, we use them for fertilizer, we use them for all sorts of silly stuff. But does anybody know how oysters reproduce inside of here? One person raise your hand. You, stand up. Okay, well, just say it. Basically, I'm going to say more nasty stuff, you guys, all right? They just basically ejaculate into the water. So it's just eggs and sperms. And once they're in reproduction mode, they're just reproducing and breathing all day long. So the water goes below 40 degrees, they get hot, and they just start pss, 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 pss. And then they meet inside the water.
Thank you for the visual.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nah, for real. This is what I live with on a daily basis. So they meet inside the water. They basically turn into like little tadpoles, and then they're supposed to fall down and land on a piece of shell. Now, back in the days when we had mountains of shells on the coastline, you could control how oyster population grew, and it was at a time period when we had oyster reefs. Oysters would be the forestry of our ocean. So that's like a forest, like a coral reef would be where the nursery and where the forest is, where all the other animals come to eat and to survive. One fully matured oyster not only is gigantic, so it could create that kind of a space where something can retract and go hide and live like we know, but also filters like 40 to 50 gallons of water inside of a day. So what happened is that we basically pulled up money is for work. Money is for work. That's what money exists for. We only have money because people got to get guaranteed that they're going to go to work and they're going to get something at the end of going to work. You know what I'm saying? So when you go and you pull out all of the food from the ocean floor, because you can now, and you can can stuff and sell it to people and put them in factories and send them to work, right? That was a crucial, important thing. It was like any entrepreneur at that time period would have been like, oh God, I can pull the whole entire ocean floor up. Yo, this is crazy. So they did that.
Yeah.
Jacked up the entire ecosystem.
They jacked it up.
And in addition to that, let's also think about the arc of the growth of what was the village of Brooklyn into the city of Brooklyn, right? Soon after Johnny Joe, Thomas Downing and others have erected these fine establishments to sell and really establish restaurants as we know it today, the Brooklyn Bridge was built. So all the steamboats from Fulton Ferry that would go back and forth carrying hundreds and even thousands of people for decades was ruining the ecological balance of the ecosystem in the waters here, the East River. So you have that on top of, overfishing and consumption of these oysters. It depleted the source and it wasn't able to regenerate itself. So even as we understand, the gaps in history, we can actually look at technological advances that kind of dominate our conscience, right? We look at the Brooklyn Bridge and we don't think about all the things we had to sacrifice in order for us to have an elephant walk across it and celebrate it, right? No, we say, oh, this is a beautiful thing. They just put new lights on it, which makes it look great at night, right? And we constantly talk about this as a major tourist attraction, and then Dumbo and Vinegar Hill and all these neighborhoods all get, revitalized into these new spaces where all the history, particularly ecologically, socially, ethnically, all get erased, and they're dominated by other more commercial forces. So I want to dive a little bit more into those aspects around how Brooklyn has changed through the foodways here. And this question is for Tanya. We made reference earlier about using lived experiences as an archive. You specifically talked about your own experiences. So without institutional memory, we rely on historians like yourself when the official archives are silent, as they often are in Black history. How do you reconstruct these stories? And what sources do you turn to beyond traditional records?
Good question. Let's see if I can answer it concisely. Well, I mean, first it starts with the sources that are available, right? It starts with curiosity and questions and reading those sources, but reading in between the lines. I mean, a lot of times I'll have to pull several different source material, books, old articles. Some you would think that Black people didn't exist at that time frame. But then in the 12th book, somebody will say something about the Black community or the Black entrepreneur or craftsperson or chef or cook. And then from there, and then I'll start to go into the bibliographies of the sources that do reference people. And then it just becomes this whole rabbit hole thing. I remember when I did some work on Solomon Northup's wife, Ann Northup, who was an accomplished chef and caterer in Saratoga. She was the wife of the man who wrote 12 Years a Slave, the 1853 New York Times bestseller that got turned into a film that won the Oscar, the best film in 2014. And the family celebrates the Northups every year in Saratoga, and they contacted me through the culinary historians, and they were like, oh, but we want to talk about Anne this year. And I was like, okay, great. And you know how hard it is to research with detail 19th century women of any hue? Even prominent white women of that era are not easy to get good data on. And on top of it, she was illiterate, and we knew that from how she signed on the census marked X. Whereas even though her husband had written this bestseller after escaping 12 years of deep Southern slavery, if she had documented her recipes, she would be on record as the oldest cookbook from an African American person or woman, but she didn't. But I'm referencing that because I remember talking to one of the reporters, the Saratoga Sun or Star or something, and he just got jaw dropped at some point when I started telling him the process through which I went to piece together Anne's story. And he was just like, "Are you a detective?" And I was like, well, my grandfather was. And so I used to trail him. So yeah, even just pulling from, sometimes it's cosmic,
Yeah.
Chef Ashbell has this whole ghost story when James Hemmings, this visitation, you can hear about it in a podcast or watch Ghosts in America's Kitchen. Sometimes it's just a matter of imagination, not in the sense of making things up, but stopping, thinking, meditating, and imagining, of trying to put yourself in the perspective, right? And sometimes stuff just comes out of, I watch a lot of PBS. Let's keep it on air, y'all. We got to support PBS.
Please.
Woo! I love documentary film and stuff. Clues literally fall out of nowhere. I have to have a notebook. So I'm a public educator, but I'm also a perpetual student. So, I'm jotting notes down and literally have to capture the clues because you never know when they're going to happen because they're not always there when you go to look for them. You find things in literature. You find things, fiction and nonfiction. You have to kind of, James Baldwin. I got all this wealth of information about watermelon from a Black perspective through, like, randomly, surprisingly, we just worked on that on Sunday. But that story kind of connects to this too, because you hear about the watermelon patch that the Revolutionary War broke out in 1776. It's like, well, how was there a watermelon patch in Brooklyn? It's like, oh, because the African heritage people had planted and cultivated it, and so you just have to, the clues can come from anywhere. I was afraid to answer this because I knew I would go on this Mrs. Toad's wild ride, but yeah.
It's all connective. And I think, you leaned on something as someone who is a preservationist, but also an experimental preservationist in thinking about how to tell a story where the archives aren't there. There are gaps, there's silencing, especially around women. That's one of the creative licenses I specifically chose to highlight in Johnny Joe's Oyster House. While it was called Johnny Joe's Oyster House, you can see he and his wife, Louisa Britton, ran the place, and she was actually noted in kind of that eulogy obituary that was written in 1880. So again, thinking about what ways stories are told only one side. You have to use inductive reasoning, logic, or several references to derive and put yourself in that context. So much of my research was going from here and then actually walking the waterfront, going to the Brooklyn Bridge and thinking, what did this building look like? What was the context? Seeing these old maps, pre-Brooklyn Bridge, I'm like, there is a $40 million high rise right here. How can I reimagine what was here, over 100 years ago? So it's important to be ferociously curious, right? Ask a lot of questions and engage. I mean, that's how Moody and myself relationship started. I knew that he had already established, his business, being a Brooklyn native. So I want to talk to you specifically about the challenges that you have found in kind of reviving and telling this story of not just Thomas Downing, but the overall element of being a Black entrepreneur in New York and being able to navigate that.
I mean, I haven't really had no problems. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I've been having some problems in terms of just the regular old getting to the financial hurdles, but in terms of the reception of the concept of what it is that we're doing, I think that we've been solving some problems. So we've been attacking our problem, and for one thing, getting oysters into my community is something that I am slacking on right now because I'm back in Manhattan. And I should be in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, where I started out doing this, or in Bed-Stuy at least. But it's definitely necessary for me to take the steps that we've been taking. We started out with this little cart. I would always tell anybody that anybody that's interested in entrepreneurial stuff, whatever that you want to start off with, just do your pop-up shop and just go for it. The day and age now of the pop-up shop is now, and you design your answer to whatever that the problem is that you're trying to solve, and design it so that you can work with other people who can kind of give you the platform that you want. For me, my background when I was a kid, my parents did theater, so we grew up inside of a nonprofit family doing a lot of plays that it was theater programs, but it was funding through conflict resolution or anti-handgun or life skills development or all these different things. And it's the way how the theater actually is solving a problem is through it's giving you these skills to be able to go out and talk about these heavy social issues, abuses of all kinds, the Annie Juniors and the Jungle Books even, these things touch on serious issues, and it gives was a person, somebody's first opportunity to express themselves. And, for me with the oysters, this is a platform, talking about oysters is a platform for me to open up a lot of different things. The sustainability construct of this is just like, this is the only food source that we farm that's actually good for the environment, good for our water, good for for your body in terms of iron, zinc, copper, magnesium in a protein that's not actually difficult to digest in a hemoprotein.
Good brain food, right?
Excellent brain food. Yep. Blood food. It's basically one of the only foods that we have access to that's from New York City. So it's a farm to table food from this location where it's like creating jobs for people inside of this location. There's a bunch of different maritime components of it, and so for me, like starting out with the oysters, it was actually kind of genius for me because it was like, this is the oyster capital. People, I'm not going to necessarily try to do what has been done already and try to chase down the yacht clubs and the fanciest places to go do this. I'm going to pursue, bring oysters back to the public, but at the same time, there is still the Pier 57s and, the clientele that do know that they want oysters around that can help to support us in the meantime, so we can get our story out there. So it's really just a matter of trying to stay in it.
Yeah, and I see you staying in it because you're also, mentoring and encouraging young people. The two opportunities that I've had a chance to patronize your business at Pier 57. One time I went with my wife, who loves oysters, by the way. I'm not the biggest fan, but the second time I went, I came. You hooked me up, and with all the flavors and you throw a little chicken in there as well. So that was I wasn't expecting that, and that was nice. So he kind of like curated the experience for me.
The culinary creativity, you're carrying that legacy on for real, right? 'Cause that's one of the things that I also pay attention to are the recipes, the creative oyster recipes that show up, right? Whether it's the soups and the stews and fried and pickled and Rockefeller, all these different, creative, because, they show up on the Jefferson's table at Monticello. They show up in Ann Northup's cookery in Saratoga. They show up in Philadelphia, the caterers. So that's a thread also, is that the deliciousness and the culinary creativity.
Well, we're trying to, once we get our brick and mortar up, we're trying to get Popeyes to try to jack us and make a oyster rich boy based off of us.
Based off
you know
of
what I'm
you.
saying? Yeah.
As long as you get some kind
You're
of
bringing
deal.
oysters back. I don't care. I need Cardi B and Susan Sarandon, and we're going to go and
Everybody eating oysters.
attack everybody. You know what I'm saying?
To where it doesn't just have to be paired with, kind of these luxurious kind of items. I think that's also often the perception within our communities that, they don't know this history. So when they do see oysters, they think it is something high end. You have to be wealthy. You got to be on a yacht.
No,
you got
it's
to pop
rich
bottles.
people food.
Right.
It's white people food. It's bougie food. And at the end of the day, you can't classify yourself by whatever that it is that you have access to or have not had access to.
Right.
That's not the way to honestly approach anything inside of our life, is like based off of what we see somebody else doing, and that being a thing to pigeonhole ourselves off of. And especially with our food, it's like, I did it to myself, so I can't even lie. But at the same time, it's just based off of exposure. I hadn't had the opportunities. Right. So being able to provide somebody with an opportunity to get something that normally would be kind of like, oh yeah, come to Gage and Toner and come get some oysters. And no, bring it on the sidewalk back in the oyster cart. And like you were saying, up until 1922, people could get oysters off the street. And they just started dumping everything in the ocean. So up in 1922's, around that area time period, when people started getting sick from eating out of the Hudson River,
Right.
and you couldn't eat out of the Hudson River anymore. But Billion Oyster Project is out, and they've got the Hudson River, the Harbor School over at Governor's Island.
Yeah.
And they're teaching high school students about
Great organization.
about marine biology, oyster reproduction in terms of how hatcheries actually are creating oysters for consumption and also for revitalization, repopulation, teaching them about scuba diving, boat captaining.
But what you're doing, though, is also important to why we need to have the history connected to the narrative, because you're taking it back before, because it did become,
Oh yes, it starts at the food.
It starts, right, but then they do elevate it to another level. The same thing happened with lobster and crab and, things that were so abundant that people could source for themselves, and it was a great source of protein. And there's a parallel story there to how lobster goes from being food for poor people.
Well, it's exactly the reason why lobsters have
people.
Yeah.
The reason why
Right.
lobsters have these pincers is because of shellfish. The reason why Maine is the one place inside the world where you can still go get lobsters from today is because they have shellfish population. So, they have a prolific oyster culture, and their culture is not to sell oysters out to the rest of the Americas, it's to sell lobsters to the rest of America, and to keep their oysters in Maine,
To keep it
To
healthy.
keep
they
the
can
ecology
keep the
going.
lobsters going,
Healthy,
so they can
right.
sell lobsters to the rest of the world.
While
So
sorry to cut you off, Moody. While I want to keep this conversation going, I'm getting that signal.
that's it.
See,
That's
I
right.
was trying
That's
to
right.
I was
They're
like-
lurking. They're
and
giving me the
also,
kind
too,
eye. So quickly, before I throw it to the audience for questions, any closing thoughts, any charge or level of engagement that you want to offer this audience to consider as they walk away on this Oyster Day? 10 seconds each.
All right, so I
Respectfully.
definitely am looking to do more of these oyster giveaways, and so I'm looking for both administrative and financial support for these oyster giveaways. All right, so if you guys have administrative skills, please contact me at info@therealmothershuckers.com, and I really would appreciate that. I'm looking to try and get an oyster cart up every single month, giving away oysters at NYCHA houses or MTA or police office, anywhere that we can try to make like an impact and give away some oysters and get people just kind of like, oh snap, the Billion Oysters Project exists. Oysters are good. I actually like to eat oysters. I didn't think I was ever going to try an oyster. That type of stuff. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to expand people's just concept behind whether or not they like oysters or not. If you do like it, then great. If you don't like it, then don't like it. And then we can go from there and start to try to revitalize New York City's oyster culture.
Thank you, brother.
Oh, I want some admin support too. thehopkins@thefoodgriot.com. Follow the Food Griot, shameless, at the Food Griot. Don't forget the T. And I'm saying that not for shameless plug, but because we didn't get a chance to, do the full comprehensive conversation. And I have a lot of content. I even have a calendar. You opened with a calendar. I have this culturally, curated calendar of food and drink holidays that have little stories. I also have a Patreon that you can join for free or for paid. And I give, special content to people who support, I'll just say that. And I have more. I have other oyster content as it connects to the
She has
the
more,
seafood
he has
story,
more,
yeah.
I have more, but we want to hear your questions.
And then, no.
All right, so we're opening it up for Q&A. If you want to engage us with any thoughts, reflections, questions.
I didn't know I'd have to stand. Hi. My question is for Moody about the particular areas around the coastline of Brooklyn where oysters are prolific. I mean, we're talking about down near the Brooklyn Bridge, but
Can you raise your mic up?
Is there a different type of access in the Rockaways or, in Canarsie, or is this downtown area really the primary area?
So generally, in terms of the area that we're in, I find that regionally, the bays is kind of what changes the I guess the flavor profiles of the oysters to an extent that you could really like distinguish them, you know. So like the Oyster Bay, or like honestly, it's like the islip of Long Island. That's like the Blue Point, the world famous Blue Point. So like in terms of like known oysters, the Blue Point and the Wellfleet are like the two known oysters besides like Kumamoto's, which is a West Coast oyster, just in terms of a name you can drop. So, you know, the Blue Point oyster would have been like a Long Island Sound kind of an oyster, and the New York City Sound oyster, we don't know what that would have been because we just never got it. You know, that's like 1920s was when that Hudson River kind of oyster would have been just out of existence. So we don't know what the oyster is that would have made Thomas Downing famous and got him the chronograph from Queen Elizabeth. But
Oh, that's right. Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria
was one of his customers.
one of the queens sent him like a big old watch for some oysters that he sent them because they were so good. But yeah, we have no idea, and it would have been different possibly based off of just that closeness of an area, just because of the bay being different. But yeah.
Another question?
Yes. I live on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge in Manhattan, and I just did an event called The Abolition of Slavery in New York. It's an event that the Asala, the stewards of Black History Month, they brought to fruition. I just wanted to know, have you had any conversations with the people in Sandy Ground? That was a whole community built around oysters.
You want to take that, Moody?
Oh no, I was just saying I have met them. They're really nice people. I went out to some of the cemeteries over there. I've been out to just to check it out because they were actually inside of High on the Hog. And High on the Hog was a documentary that I was in. It was talking about oysters and how, basically Staten Island got founded by Black people with oyster farming, and strawberry farming. But yeah.
Yeah. They were part of, that was one of the areas I looked at, in research and preparation for this and other content, but also looking at oystering and preparation and consuming within Black context, Black communal context versus as purveyors of fine dining with a whole different audience, because we all know that was for an elite non-Black audience of I don't know the word audience or consumer or patrons. So the two, just looking at the different avenues, the different contexts. And so there was a lot of interesting information there in terms of, and then also the Dutch houses, the Old Stone House and the Lefferts House and Wyckoff House, which is where I do a lot of public education. And looking at like the people, the enslaved people who worked the land, and free people that later that continued to work at these Dutch farms, how it was their job. They were the ones to do the oystering and preparing and cooking all the meals, but how that's a very different conversation than what we're talking about in terms of entrepreneurship. And
Well,
selling.
I think there's still a through line there because a lot of the oystering that was happening was still predominantly Black folks. So the foodways, the routes in which he would arrive to those homes would be through word of mouth, right? And again, this is some of the deductive reasoning that I would be doing as I'm researching is like, all right, how does a Thomas Downing come up and Johnny Joe not come up, right?
Right, because he didn't come up, and I have a theory on that, but go on, yeah.
I want to hear it, but we can talk about that offline. But I think it's important to understand that like during this time, you had a lot of individuals who were free, indentured servitude, and or fully enslaved, and part of the Black community was that word of mouth. There were churches, there were benevolent societies where a lot of this conversation was happening. So even those who were enslaved and serving, their enslavers in these homes, these Dutch houses, they were learning recipes and different ways to prepare, or ones that were better So a lot of conversations and connections were happening, and they still happen as I reflect on, having lived in Flatbush, a Caribbean neighborhood, and seeing how all the food and the fruit and different types of fish and cuisine constantly circulates as a loop through the Caribbean, through West Africa, constantly. So these things
We didn't
are,
even talk about that, the whole Caribbean connection.
there's always so much, I know.
All of the food griot, and these guys too.
While I want to keep this conversation going, I want to throw it back out here to see if we have any other questions.
The simple answer.
Hi,
is
it's me again.
clientele was
Thank you so much for your lovely talk. We've learnt a lot. We've talked a lot about history, obviously. I'd be so grateful to hear your thoughts and hopes for the future of the Oyster Foodways in New York. Not only like the food and dining culture, but also you've touched a bit on the kind of ecological reality of the estuary and connecting New Yorkers back to their natural surroundings. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and hopes for the future of this foodway.
I think for myself, being the artist, more people, recognize what they see in front of them hasn't always been. New York is changing so rapidly, especially Brooklyn, and it has a very long history, much of which started right here as the village of Brooklyn. So download the Kinfolk app. Specifically, read about Johnny Joe and Louisa, Thomas Downing, and other Black entrepreneurs and proprietors that were out there who were cultivating and somewhat popularizing these dishes and making them accessible to the general public. That is my hope, that the history is told there so there can be a pride behind consumption, not just the consumption of it in and of itself.
I can tell you what I would like the future to be. Just as a time traveler, as a fellow time traveler, you look at what was, the gloriousness of it, sometimes the heartbreak of it. I would like for a more inclusive capitalism around this type of work, because you look at how once upon a time these people who created, who at least whether they created or pioneered or were on the forefront of carving out entirely new industries, whether the oyster, the upscale oyster house, the other aspects of fine dining, soup, ice cream, on and on. You look today, and it's kind of like capitalism has been like, oh, that's great. What else you got? And there seems to be this equation where there's no people wherever it originated, they're not part of the current equation.
It's extractive.
Right. It's a very extractive instead of like collaborative or sharing, profit sharing, or whatever the language. I'm not a finance person, but I'm getting someone on my team to talk about this in this from this angle, seriously, because it's a big deal, right? Because that's the elephant in the room to me that never gets talked about. It's like, yes, they did all these great things, but where is that? Where are the empires today? Where, from a culinary angle alone, from just the work, some of the work that I've done over the years, I'm like, wait a minute, people should be among the wealthiest Americans if. Just looking at food stuff only, if it were if things really worked less extractively. So I just wish that there were different business models, different, if that makes any sense. I see some heads nodding, so you all were tracking with that stream of consciousness. Thank you.
Oh yeah. So my goal is, like I said before, I have no doubt that this will be stolen,
What was stolen?
This will be stolen. Oysters, when they do make a comeback, it's going to be taken straight out of my hands. But I do want to see it happen. I want to see it. I want to see something happen for I want to see somebody get rich doing something that benefits the planet for once, And it's true. It's true. I mean, imagine people in Lagos having oyster farms right now and making these rich boy patties because they saw Mother Shuckers make some little frozen rich boy patties and selling them, and they got hot, and Popeyes took it and started making oysters a premier food.
seriously?
And 10% of the planet started eating more oysters, and then the ocean got 10% more oysters because people started farming oysters and just having them, and then 10% more small fish start to come back into our ocean, and whales can eat and live inside of environments with 10% more zooplankton because of these oysters doing their job of making this production, and the algae production, the algae consumption going up. This is different stuff that happened just based off of oysters being inside the water. So if we could get it to be a cool thing inside of my lifetime, where it's just like, I definitely want to be getting rich off of this idea. I definitely want to get rich off of this idea.
Well,
however, I want it to be more like bigger than I can even money than I can even handle type thing. I want it to be so much money that people are getting rich. Many people are getting rich off of this thing because, Popeyes should come and actually start to sell a food that's helpful to the environment and healthier for people, at least healthier for people than this hormone chicken weirdness that I don't know what it is, and I'm addicted to it, and I know that it's bad.
Well, Moody, there's two things here. One, as a resident Nigerian, you made reference to Lagos.
Yeah, took more than once. Yeah.
Right. We welcome you, my brother.
Yes, I know this.
Nigeria needs it. But in addition to that, talking about richness, this has been a very rich conversation. I'd like to thank both of you so much, Moody and Tanya, Marcia, Kavina, the whole archives team here, Kinfolk Tech. Can we give a round of applause for Kinfolk Tech? Raven, Idris, the whole team there that worked with me in order to render this wonderful digital monument. I encourage you all to explore it. There are iPads out there.
It's
you
fabulous.
also have phones. So download the Kinfolk app. There'll be QR codes in the back as well. Explore the app, come up to us, engage. We also have refreshments, some parties, so how Jimmy can say it, and wine.
Is it going to stay up at the bridge? Is that going to just be there
Yes,
forever?
so
Or-
the Dreaming with the Archives exhibition is up through the end of the month, and I believe every Tuesday and Saturday, Raven, Sunday, there are walking tours. And randomly, I may just pop out there and walk with you. So please check out brooklynbridgepark.org for more, or Dreaming with the Archives. Thank you again for joining us. You all have a wonderful evening. Happy Oyster Day.